hello, Karen
Hi
Mann.
again.
She is our regulatory and cosmetic science expert, and she has worked for companies like L'Oreal, and she's now in the industry. Well, I'll let her give her intro in her presentation. But should we start up the slides here, Karen?
Sure, if everybody's ready.
Okay, yeah, we've got over 130 people online. All right, Karen. Well, why don't you take it away? First, let people know about yourself, and then get started.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Barry. Well, we created this webinar because we felt that it would be good for you guys to have an overview of the essential things to know about cosmetic regulations. Regulations are a complicated topic, and it is actually quite hard to stay on the top of the iceberg. But this is what I'm going to try to do today in about 40 minutes. So during this webinar, we will discuss these 7 points. We will look at ingredients and how to navigate the complexities of ingredients, but also look at how regulations impact the formula and R&D. Then we must absolutely talk about safety, as it is the basis of all cosmetic regulations. And then, of course, as Perry was discussing earlier about the labeling, then we need to think about how do we look at the differences between all the global markets. As Perry said, there are 154 countries in the world, and more or less many of them have their own regulations. How on earth can we monitor this? Then, on the 6th point, we will look at the approval process and how regulatory interacts with the product development lifecycle. And lastly, we will have a look at how to follow the emerging trends in regulatory and the current hot topics. And last but not least, we would like to introduce you to a new innovative training course that has taken some months in the making, and we will go through this at the end.
Some 24 months.
Yes,
Karen, before you get on, so that's the introduction. That's what we're going to cover. Before that, I just want to give we're going to end the poll here, and I'll give you some results from the poll here. So you know the audience. If we're looking here, we're pretty spread out, but 22% said their biggest challenges with navigating regulations is keeping up with the changing international regulations. Another 22 said understanding and implementing ingredient restrictions. That's from formulating. That's always a challenge. 21% said managing product claims and substantiation requirements. Fewer people said, 10% said ensuring packaging compliance and labeling. And then 15% adapting to specific markets. So we've got a wide range of things, but it looks like keeping up with regulations is a big thing for people. So and courses like this one and webinars like this as a way to do that. So all right, with that aside, I'm going to let you keep going here.
Okay, thanks, Barry. So just a little bit about myself. I started out doing a PhD in inorganic chemistry in the labs at the University of Bristol and obtained 15 publications in various journals. If you connect on my LinkedIn profile, all of them are listed here, so you can check those out. I have worked at a variety of different companies, from multinationals like at L'Oreal, where I spent most of my career, but equally a retailer. I'm sure you must have heard of them, Walgreens Boots Alliance. And I've worked for 2 luxury brands, a little bit more in the startup phase of the beauty business at Dolce Gabbana and Burberry. And then I was also Regulatory Affairs Global Director and equally Head of Quality, also at Intercos, which is a famous third-party manufacturer here in Italy. And it's thanks to them that I decided that I should stay in Italy. So that's a little bit about myself. So basically, the benefits of this webinar, and I hope that it will give you a greater understanding of how regulatory can impact the business, not just the business itself, but also R&D in particular, as well as marketing and sales, because regulatory is end-to-end of the product life cycle, essentially. We will also see how regulatory affects the product formulations, and equally, as this seems to be a challenge for you, how to proactively anticipate various evolutions. Just bear in mind that this is a very short webinar. All of these topics I could literally spend a full morning discussing with you, and this is why I created the training course, Liaising with Burberry. Also, for marketing in particular, is to create greater technical accuracy in the product briefs. And lastly, being able to put products onto global markets more effectively and faster. So now let's deep dive into the first of the 7 key things that are essential to know. And here we start with ingredient compliance. Now, I'm not going to go through this, this listing, but essentially you will see the different regions. These are the main regions and main regulatory models, which are the EU/UK, because UK has adopted EU, US, Canada, and China. There is also Japan, but I haven't delved into Japan due to the complexity of this market. But essentially, you will see that in the regulations, you have banned lists, restricted lists, and positive lists, and inventories as well. Now, a key point I'd like to highlight is for a positive list, you can only use the ingredient that is listed on that list. If, for example, you found a new innovative colorant, if you want to be able to use that as a colorant in your product, you will need to ensure that you get this listed on a positive list, as well as on the International Nomenclature of Cosmetic Ingredients, which is the INCI, managed by the US. The other important point I wish to draw your attention to is in China specifically, their inventory of existing chemical ingredients in China. You have to ensure that your ingredients in your formulation are present on this list. Otherwise, you cannot place your product on the market. This is a little bit slightly different with the other inventories, but for China, it is definitely a must, as well as all the OTC monographs or drug monographs in US and Canada, and equally China for special cosmetics. So how do we navigate all these markets? As I mentioned, I've just mentioned 4 or 5 key markets. But every country in the world now more or less has a cosmetic regulation. Well, the first really important point to note is these countries I listed on the previous slide, they essentially are the main models of how regulations are composed. And many countries in the world take inspiration from these models, or they might follow and adopt a model directly into their local legislation, or do a combination. And if you know, and of course you need the experience, but generally any type of country will follow one of those types of models or combination. So it does make things a bit more simple. But the key point with navigating ingredients is to know the legislation. And from my side, I believe you need to know the model, first of all, understand the 4 or 5 major models in the world, then start to understand a little bit more how that country goes into depth on their ingredient legislation. The second thing that you need is because, of course, once you are developing your formulation, if you want to be innovative, you want to use all ingredients under the sun, so you have no restrictions. But unfortunately, even as a formulator, you have to follow the legislation. And to do that, you really need an IT tool. And you can either, there are quite a few subcontractors who have IT tools, or if your company is big enough, you have an IT tool developed already for you. And then you will have people that need to input the legislation relating to ingredients into these IT tools, so that you as a formulator can design your formulation that's already safe and conforms with the legislation. Now, as you mentioned in the challenges, regulatory ingredient monitoring is a big challenge. I've done it by hand, particularly for the European Chemicals Agency chemicals, which, frankly speaking, was a nightmare. And therefore, this is why you absolutely have to have an IT tool. However, having said that, there are ingredients that are hot topics, and I do go into detail on these in the training course that I've developed. And you can, for example, D4, D5, and D6, it was known about 5-6 years ago that these ingredients were a problem. So there are certain ingredients which are political, and there are some like endocrine disruptors, CMRs, etc., which are groups of substances, and this makes it easier to follow. And you can follow this with the trade industry associations, for example. The other thing that I believe that will help you navigate is also to develop your own blacklist. Now, in the training, I talk about restrictions. People always think ingredients are restricted by the legislation. But actually, that used to be the case. But now there are other drivers of restrictions of ingredients. And these, maybe you're surprised, but are the consumers, in fact. You might remember the paraben story, free from parabens. In fact, on the legislation, some of the parabens are fine and have good safety profiles. However, the consumer, there were some smaller companies that put free from parabens on all their packaging. So therefore, other consumers saw the pack and said, oh, okay, well, parabens must be bad. And in fact, the consumer and the smaller companies ended up denigrating some otherwise okay ingredients. So it is important to understand what's happening with the consumers. We also have NGOs. And we have the press, the media. We also have a lot of ingredients which get banned due to political pressure. Microplastics is a very good example, and microbeads. So by having a blacklist, you don't need to input the legislation into your blacklist. It doesn't make sense. That should already be in your IT tool. But what you want to do is you want to use your blacklist to create positions that your company should have respect to hot topic ingredients. Or, for example, parabens. You could have a company position for parabens. You could have a company position for GMOs, genetically modified organisms. Anything that could have a media impact, etc. And excuse me. And in this way, before a legislation actually is made into a legislation, you can decide your position ahead of the law. And therefore, you can then be sure you will be compliant when the legislation hits, and also proactively communicate your messages to the consumer. And lastly, you can use your blacklist for claims, for example, vegan. You know, you want to decide what is your policy for supporting vegan on your pack. All your raw materials, all the data of the raw materials should be inputted into your IT tool, and is a huge amount of data. I'm sure you're already aware of this, but all of that data relating to vegan, organic, gluten-free, halal, ISO, etc., should be inputted into the IT tool, so you can do checks on claim support on your substances. It's quite a big topic. The other aspects I'd like to discuss on ingredients are the actual lists. Now, Perry touched on this earlier in his introduction, and it's more a strategic thing that you need to think about is, do you want to have a global artwork or a regional artwork? This is the first and foremost decision that you need to take. The reason being, if I want to sell my products in the US, Canada, and also the EU, you can in fact do a trilingual artwork. Now, I've put here translations for common names. What does that mean? So for example, standard ingredients, maybe like glycerin, but particularly with water and other. In Europe, the definition is for the inkies, we use the Latin name. In the US, you guys use the English name, but in Canada, they have French. So instead of just having aqua on your pack in your ingredient list, if you're doing a trilingual artwork, you need to have aqua, water, O. And you equally need to decide on the order that you want to put those in. Also, if you want to go to China, for example, it'll be very difficult to do a global pack, because it used to be the case that you could use your existing pack and sell in China. However, now it's far better commercially to have the China language all over the pack, so create a Chinese pack. Obviously, it adds to the cost because you're increasing the number of packs. But essentially, you have to think about that in the go-to-market strategy. And then it's already been touched on the allergens. In the EU, it's 26 allergens have to be labeled on the pack with different percentages for leave-on and rinse-off products for the fragrances. However, the hot news is that in Europe, they are going to extend that list to 82. Now, you obviously can't get 82 allergens on the pack. So again, there are working groups trying to decide how labeling of ingredient lists can move forwards. Maybe digitally is the only answer. Then we need to think about makeup shades. And again, it's a commercial decision. It depends on the budget. And you need to think about if you want to list your colorant shade by shade. You have to do that in order of their percentage up to 1, which would mean that you have 1 artwork per shade. Or you could save some money and you could decide that, no, I want 1 artwork per franchise. And in that case, you can put the colorants at the end of the ingredient list. This is basically the EU legislation, but a lot of markets are inspired by this practice. And then lastly, if you have innovations and you've created a brand new raw material, brand new inky, because as you know, the ingredients are part of the raw materials, you will need to get a new inky from the Personal Care Product Council in the US. So every indication on the pack has to be in the form of an INCI, and that is a global standard, luckily. Okay, so now we've had a look at the ingredients. Let's have a little bit of a look on the formulation side. Now, I've gone into depth in the previous chapter on the ingredient compliance and how you can manage that more effectively. However, when it comes to the labs, you know that you will also have to do specific tests like stability testing, and you have to also do safety testing, equally efficacy. Now, different companies organize themselves differently, and it depends who in the business does these testing. Stability is generally done by the labs, and normally you would do a 3-month accelerated stability study, which could potentially be extrapolated to a 3-year shelf life of your product. Now, when we're thinking about regulatory in terms of efficacy, safety testing, there aren't exactly guidelines laid down in the legislation to say, unless it's an OTC, of course, and in which case there are guidelines. But they aren't really specific guidelines. However, there are good practices. So like GMP, good manufacturing practices. You have a framework of how to create the test report. Like, for example, you need to have it dated, signed. You need to have the study objective. You need to have results and conclusions. But there's a lot of work that needs to go into when you're looking at the product brief and the claims that marketing wish to make. There's a lot of work, upfront work, where you need to work together, so R&D, marketing, and regulatory. You need to decide, A, on the wording of claims, because the actual wording that goes on the pack or advertising is actually kind of regulated by the advertising standards authorities, particularly in the US and UK. Those two markets are the strictest in the world. And to do advertising, you have to have prepare a dossier to get your advert passed. In this particular case, the way that you write the test reports, the way that you show that the test report that you've presented can validate and justify the claim is highly important. If you don't get this this right, you could be refused advertising for your product. And this is why this step is so crucial to get right. I would say it's not specifically regulatory. I would say this is slightly creative, and a lot of work needs to be done with the R&D. The regulatory comes in with the wording, because sometimes when you get the test reports back, you might have to change the wording because the test report doesn't substantiate up to 24 hours. Maybe it only goes to 12 hours. It's a very complicated topic, and I'm having to hold myself back to go into too much detail, but all of this is explained in my training course. And the other thing, of course, are the labeling and pack requirements. You've seen already the ingredient listing that is very much run by the regulatory team. The labs, of course, will put the period after opening, which is an EU requirement, or expiry date on the product, and will also instruct the storage conditions. And lastly, for the labs, you need to have adequate documentation and record keeping of all the formulations, all the batches, and so on, which I'm sure you're already well aware of. But this is where regulatory sort of spills over a little bit into the quality side as well. Okay. Now let's look at a fun slide, if we can say that, about the safety of cosmetic products. So here you have a Christmas slide linking to the product safety. Now, if you look at the top bubble under the header, the first essential point you need to do, and I'm sure you all are aware of this, is a safety assessment. Now, in the EU, in the annex, it's very, very clear how you're supposed to present the cosmetic product safety report. But equally, for you to be aware, is the safety assessor has to have certain qualifications to be able to do the cosmetic product safety report, which is CPSR. And you have, in this CPSR, you have considerations of the formula, of course, the ingredients, also impurities have to be looked at, exposure, manufacturing, which is the GMP, stability, safety, and efficacy testing. These are all taken into account in the safety assessment. And generally speaking, the safety assessment is performed at the end of your product, towards the end of your product development process. So clearly, the first objective is to select your ingredients, and my general advice is that follow the legislation. The main reason for cosmetic legislation is safety. So you can pretty much be guaranteed that if you're following the legislation, that you are okay. Now, there is an exception to that in the sense that the legislation is using data that we have today. Who knows what happens tomorrow? You know, in the press, especially with food and what we should eat, etc., it changes all the time. And the reason is because it's the same with ingredients. We get new data, we get new techniques for evaluating ingredient safety and so on. So this is why the ingredient legislation is always updated. Then we've talked about the formulation and stability. Of course, as formulators, you need to ensure that the performances are what the brief has asked for, and equally that your formulation is stable and safe. I will give you a quick example of a situation which was slightly stressful with at L'Oreal in the factory. I had 3 batches of Ombre Slair worth £300,000 of 10 tons each, and each of those batches decided to invert themselves. So the emulsion basically essentially was no longer stable, and it was a total nightmare, and we had to fix it, but we did. So then we have, we've talked already about a little bit about the safety and efficacy testing. And equally for the labeling, the safety considerations are inherent on the ingredient listings. The consumers need the ingredient listing because if you're allergic to a particular ingredient, they will look at the ingredient listings and then make a decision if they will not have a problem with that product or not. And that is the main reason for the listings. Equally, the warnings. Bear in mind that you need to complete your safety assessment before you do your artwork, because the safety assessment includes the warnings that need to be listed on the artwork. Then we have, which can be a bit marketing as well, is how to use the product in a safe way, and then storage conditions. And lastly, we need a post-market surveillance system. You need to have a process internally where you collect all the data coming back from the consumers, also customer complaints. So this is also linked with quality, but particularly on the regulatory side is the serious adverse events reporting. This is basically when someone goes to hospital and you have to report that event to the authorities within a very short time frame of 12 hours, I believe. And in the US legislation, the new MOCRA that's coming out, this will be something that will also be part of that. Labeling requirements. Now, again, with labeling, I could spend a whole morning or afternoon discussing it, but I thought it would be more useful for you to understand some strategies and some general principles when it comes to labeling. Labeling is actually quite a complicated topic, and it seems quite straightforward when you look at the legislation. But when you're actually on the ground and you have to create an artwork, it becomes quite a nightmare. So what can help you is having some principles. And as I mentioned before with ingredients, you need to know the requirements regulatory-wise in the different markets. You need to familiarize yourself with the 5 models, which I explained in the earlier slide. And then you need to understand which markets are following those models. And then that will make your life a little easier. Then after that, you have to consider things like what type of thing you have to put on your packaging. What's the formatting? What about font sizes? The US, for example, and also Canada have very specific font sizes for the weight declaration and the statement of identity on the front of pack. Now, I'm not saying that, well, maybe, I don't know, but maybe customs in the US is sitting there with a ruler measuring your font sizes. Generally, no. However, it's a risk-based approach because the US font sizes on the principal display panel, which is your front panel, are huge. It's really way too big. So you have, as a business, have to decide if you take a level of risk. If you're a small company, you'll probably have a lower risk than a larger company. If you're not on the blacklist with customs, your risk is again lower. So you have to take all these considerations into your risk assessment of whether you make the sizes smaller and to what degree. Then we have on a label, you always have the fighting going on between the design and the regulatory information. Unfortunately, the regulatory information in this case does take precedence. However, you need to have a business approach that, okay, if all my pack is full of information that consumers might not read, I'm not going to sell the product. So you have to take a pragmatic approach to packs. You need to equally have a strategy for small packs versus larger packs, and equally product category specifics like mascara versus a foundation versus a makeup powder, etc. And what are you going to do for the small packs? Because it's very challenging to get the information on. Again, you need a market strategy. You need to decide how many packs you're going to have, how many languages you're going to have. You must ensure that the text is not so small that your ordinary consumer cannot read it at a distance of 30 centimeters. And as we mentioned before with the quality side, you need to keep records of all the label content, the design changes, future proofs, and so on. You obviously need not just the regulatory team to review the product labels, but you need a lot of stakeholders to review the artworks. And ideally, every department needs to, you need to have a RACI, which is who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be consulted, and who needs to be informed. And of course, the objective is right first time. From my experience of doing artworks, you never get right first time. It's impossible. However, if you stick to general principles and have standing operating procedures, good training, and so on, you can at least work towards that. And again, as we've already seen, you really must monitor the regulations in the markets that you're selling your products to ensure that your artwork is always in compliance. and again claims substantiation, which we've seen. I won't go into detail on these. All of this is in the training. Just an example of some of the mentions that need to be on your front of pack, primary and secondary, and equally the other panels. And if you're doing global artworks, it starts to become quite a exercise in juggling, I would say. International regulation differences. How do we navigate these and the complexity? Well, I've already mentioned it before. These are the type of things that you need to understand per market, how they are regulated. The first thing really is to know the markets that you're going in, which I've mentioned before. And for each of those markets, you need to identify the regulatory authority. And you can decide to bond with them if you like. It generally is advisable to bond with the regulatory authorities because in case of major issues, they can potentially be a support if you show them that you've tried to respect the legislation, but you're still having problems with X, Y, and Z. They generally, it depends on the market, but they generally will be more open to that. The second point, which is absolutely crucial, and I explain this a lot more in the training course, is to know the definition of what exactly is a cosmetic product. Why should I care about this? Well, for example, what about a fragrance for a dog? The marketing come up with these very innovative ideas. And you have to think, well, okay, what is this? Is this a cosmetic? Is this a chemical? Is this a veterinary product? What legislation do I have to follow for this particular product? And that is why the definition is so critical. There are definitions also of drugs, of chemicals, of veterinary medicines, of course, and so on, toys, etc. So you absolutely need to know that the proposal in the brief, you need to identify the legislation right up front so that you know exactly what you need to be checking, especially if you're in the regulatory side. Because then when you're formulating, you need to know what the restrictions are. Maybe they're not cosmetic restrictions, maybe they are chemical restrictions, and the list is completely different. I've talked quite a lot about the ingredients, the claims, the labeling, safety assessments, and the product testing. Just to bear in mind, for over-the-counter drugs or DIN products in Canada, special cosmetics in China, all the countries call them different names, but essentially these are borderline between cosmetic and drugs. And the US and Canada are very, very strict on the testing requirements, particularly for expiry date and stability testing. The test protocol is completely different, but not totally different, but it is longer than it is for a normal cosmetic. And you have to be certified and verified with the FDA if it's in the US. Now, registrations and notifications, you've done all this work to develop your product. Now, the next thing regulatory have to do is they have to get the product onto your market so that you can sell. It really, again, it depends on the model, it depends on the market, and every country has a different process by which you get products on the market. Now, obviously, if you're experienced, you will know them, but it is quite challenging. But generally, an Excel spreadsheet works quite well as well. Some countries will have nothing to do, just a customs invoice and shipping list. Some countries you can notify, like in the EU, on an online portal, and then you can immediately put your product onto the market if it's safe. And then other countries, more complicated ones, some in Latin America and Asia, North Asia, they will want you to register your product. And the document requirements are different for every market. and the timeline to register is different for every market. So basically, an Excel spreadsheet or an IT tool is very useful for this. And you have to basically have a full list of documents and which countries require what documents and so on. Animal testing, very briefly, China need a GMP document now. Before you had to do animal testing on cosmetics, but now they don't. And then you need to look at the penalties of prison, jail, fines, or whatever as well. Nearly there. Navigating the approval process. Essentially, this is a slide taken from my from the training. It's really following the product development process right from concept to the end, when you're placing products on the market with the registrations and notifications. And equally, you will see that post-market surveillance is done even after all of that. So marketing have moved on. They're now on their next project, but you in the quality team, for example, regulatory, still have to follow what's going on in the market. So I won't go into detail on these because it's more explained in much more depth in the training course. But it just gives you an idea that regulatory is involved at the different steps along the product development process. Right, this topic I think is what you would like to hear more about, are the emerging trends in regulatory. So you have this very beautiful colored eye. You need to keep an eye, as we've all agreed, on the legislations, but how on earth do we do that? There are a number of ways to do that, particularly using your networks. If you have distributors, going to conferences, seminars, workshops, and so on. But the important point is internally, how do you manage this internally in your business? Well, IT tools. You also need to think about how are you going to communicate any updates and regulatory information? How are you going to integrate regulatory changes into the various processes in your business? You need to think about formulation, artwork, go-to-market strategies. For example, with the cyclosiloxanes, they give a wonderful texture. You have to take them out, but you need a substitution strategy. You need an alternative to substituting those products, which is why you absolutely must anticipate as far as possible any changes relating to ingredients. And then you scout, and then you also need to think about impact and risk assessments. And lastly, the major topics at the moment in the cosmetic industry are as follows. Global regulations are diverging. An example is EU and the UK. The UK, at the beginning of Brexit, took the EU legislation as it is, but they have a separate chemical legislation. They have a separate way of managing ingredients now. So this is probably going to create divergences in the ingredient legislation, which means that if I'm making a product for the EU and UK market, like Perry was mentioning, what do I follow? Do I follow both? Yes and no. But essentially, this creates trade barriers. Then we have clean and green beauty. We have ingredient transparency and sourcing. And we have considerations of sustainability and hazard versus risk. Then we also have the packaging, less plastic and more recyclable materials. Ingredients, if innovation in the companies is outpacing the policy making, it does actually give you an advantage in some ways. So you need to consider these. And also the digital area, particularly on AI. I know Perry has done a webinar on this. And this is increasing a lot in our world, which is going to change things quite substantially. And lastly, the consumers. We need to think about how to communicate to them and their awareness. Okay, last but not least, sorry, there's so much to talk about. Welcome. I hope that you will do the training course. We would love you to.
Yeah.
I hope that from this webinar you can see that I'm trying to use a more innovative and different approach than just regurgitating the regulations. I really do want to be able to help you to go fishing and catch the fish, so that you can navigate more effectively with the legislations. Over to you, Perry.
Yeah, no, over to you, over to both of us. Thanks so much. Now, thank you, everybody. There's been a lot of questions sent in. Let me just get off the slides there. So, well, that was a fully packed webinar, lots of great information. And you had mentioned the course. I want to tell you there is an offer right now, special offer for the course. Just a little bit about the course. It's really eight modules, which really gets in depth about regulations. This was just a little sampling here, but one introduction to cosmetics regulations. There's a section on drivers of the ingredient restrictions, a talk of ingredients under scrutiny and what sort of options you have there, risky ingredient categories, the rules that you have to follow to place products on the market. There's a whole section on incorporating regulations in the product development process. So a lot of great stuff. There's also a quizzes that go along with all that. So you actually will go through and learn this information. And right now only, since we're limiting this course, the participation in this course, because this is the first time we're doing it. And so we want to launch it, get some feedback on it, and make improvements along the way. But if you're just going to join here today, you can click on the special offer to join the course. All right, and of course, we give you if you complete all the quizzes and modules, you get a certificate of completion there. Karen has put a lot of work in this. She's covered a lot of detail of the stuff that she's learned here, right? Karen, how long have we been working on this? A couple of years.
A couple of years, yes. It's not so easy to explain regulations in a way that is actually a bit more fun and useful.
Right. Erica has asked, is the training course geared towards the US or EU?
It's global.
Right. She covers both, you know, and even there's some you know, the US stuff is changing, and so we'll update it with the MOCRA stuff as that comes in, but there's certainly mention of that. All right. So are you ready to get to some questions?
Sure, I'm ready.
We had a lot of them. So, okay, our first question comes from Richard. Actually, we answered Richard's before. Let's go to a question from Kathy. What is the process for private label suppliers? They need to keep their contract manufacturers' information private. So how do you handle private labelers as far as putting like the address and who's on the label?
Okay, for the address, it's always the responsible person that goes on there. Sometimes, particularly for the US, you have to add the distributor address or importer. If you are doing a global artwork like US, EU, so the North countries, you'll have to add the responsible person for the EU as well. So you may even have about 4 different responsible people on your artwork. So again, it depends on the market that you want to go to. I hope I've answered that correctly.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, next question comes to us from, let's see, Nicole. When you said IT tools, you use that phrase a lot. What does IT mean? What do you mean by that?
So information technology.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Also, this week, thanks to the UPERI and the IFSCC, I listened to a presentation by SGS on an AI tool to help you navigate regulations, particularly with updates. So this is AI now being used in the tool, but there are other tools that I'm aware of. Coptis is one.
Yeah.
Although I'm not the biggest fan of it, because they go by what people say rather than going directly to the legislations themselves. There are some others, but if you would like to know which ones, I can pull them together.
Sure, sure. Speaking of pulling together, for the people that have stayed on the webinar this far, I'm going to put up a free resource that we can share here. So if you should be able to see this file. Now, this is, we just went through and picked some of the regulatory resources for the cosmetic industry. That's just links to all the regulations around the world, so the governmental agencies, and so that's just a helpful tool to have there. Feel free. That's a free bonus for just staying on this long and listen and get more information for you. All right, Karen, let's get another question in here. This question comes to us from Morag. She says, what about a QR code on the label which directs you to information on the label that's on an app or a website? Is that allowed right now?
Yes, yes. In fact, a lot of environmental regulation is added onto the QR code. And I think companies are also choosing to add all sorts of other information as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great tool for marketing, really. You get the consumers to go to your website, and then you get lots of stuff. Okay, there was a couple of questions about asking about whether people could get the slides here. So are we comfortable sharing the slides, or is that good? Okay, yeah, in a follow-up email, I'll give you a link to slides. Okay, next question comes to Laura. She said, you said that the different colors in the nail polish might be listed at the end of the label under may contain. I'm wondering if the order of those colors matter. She has a product where some colors are present in different amounts in the different shades, so I'm not sure the order is important on the label for colors.
It's a very good question. The legislation says that you have to put the ingredients in descending order up to 1%, and then in any order below 1%. So I'm guessing with colorants that they would be below 1%, or if they are, then you have no problem. You can list them in any order at the end. If you're not entirely sure, so if you have colorants which are above 1%, start your may contain with the highest one and just label them in order.
Yeah, yeah.
As long as you can explain your rationale, it's okay.
Yeah, that's the key. I think you have to be able to explain why you're doing what you're doing. Laura had another question. What qualifications should a safety assessor have to be able to create a CPSR? I'm looking for more information on the accepted types of diplomas or online courses that can be taken to become a safety assessor. I have a diploma in chemical engineering, but I haven't been able to get an answer to this question.
And where are you based?
That's a good question, Laura. If you want to put where are you based, but let's assume it's the EU somewhere.
Okay, easier.
Yeah.
Because
US, we're loosey-goosey here in the US. Yeah, you can do anything.
Cosmetics Europe actually offers a very good course. I think it's 2 weeks. It's very, very intensive. I think that's the course that I know is the best course in the EU that's available to be able to do safety assessments after the course. I think you have to do an exam. But again, I can work with Perry to draft some answers which can be shared out on email, and I can give you the link.
Yeah. Speaking of links, right now you should see an offer to the course. There's more information about the course there. Just click that and you can check it out. We got special pricing for just this webinar. We're only going to keep the course registration open for the next week, actually. And so if you want to get in, this is kind of now the time to get it. When we revamp it and launch later on next year, the price is going to be higher than right now. So this is just the special pricing just for this first launch of the course. But if you have regulatory questions, if you want to learn to become a regulatory expert, or at least have a better feeling about the regulation questions that you have and the ability to answer them, as Karen says, she's trying to teach you how to fish here, not to give you the fish. And so hopefully this course would be helpful in that. All right, let's see if we have some more questions here. Here's another question. This one comes to us from Caroline. She says, Amazon is flagging my soap products even though I've removed the claims from my listing. The ingredients are, she has turmeric powder, kojic acid. Are ingredients enough to warrant the need for a cosmetic registration? She's in the U.S. I could field that one a little one, Karen, if you're. So I know a little bit about U.S. regulations, but in the U.S., soap is not considered a cosmetic. It actually doesn't fall under the FDA rules. It's a very special carve out in our rules. And the thing about it is, if you don't have to follow the cosmetic rules if you're selling soap. However, there's a big caveat there. You cannot make any cosmetic claims. If you make any kind of cosmetic claims about your soap, then it becomes a cosmetic, and then you got to follow the rules, because it really should be a cosmetic. The reason it's not in the US is because when the rules were set in the 1930s, the soap lobby said, hey, love your new rules. How about we don't get in there? And they knew some legislator, and so they got a little carve out. So they're not part of it. They fall under a different thing. But as it's going, if you're calling out your ingredients in your soap, the turmeric powder, the kojic acid, I could certainly see how Amazon would start to say, oh, this soap is now, that's a cosmetic claim. And so you're going to have to follow the rules of the FDA for cosmetics and that cosmetic labeling. All right, well, we have, let's see if we have any more questions here. If you have a question, feel free to post there. If you have questions about the course, certainly. As far as the course goes, you register now. We pretty much have lifetime access to the course. So there's no limit and when you're going to be able to complete it, although we encourage you to complete it within 2 months. That's the best way to do it. However, as with all of our courses, once you get involved with it, you should still have access. And if anything happens with our website and such, we also offer things to get downloaded. And now, of course, something like regulations, it changes a lot. And so we're going to have some updates in the future. But if you're joining in, you're getting in right now, then you're going to have access to those updates. Whereas in the future, people might not be able to. All right, Karen, let's see if we got another question. Do you have, let's see here.
There's one about from Qatar, about Morocco and North Africa.
Oh yeah, do you have any idea about the regulations in Morocco or North Africa?
Yes, I mean, not. I would have to have a look at the legislation for those. But generally speaking, following the EU should set you up very well.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, it's and the capital of Morocco is Rabat. I've not been there, but they were in the news. They were in the news earlier for that big earthquake, and hopefully everybody is okay there. Okay, we have another. Looks like we have another question posted here. Chris, regarding ingredient list labeling on packaging, shall we need to list out everything, including additives, preservatives, in an ingredient blends? That's a pretty common question. So imagine this scenario, Karen. Somebody is using a surfactant in their formula. They know in that surfactant is, say, methylparaben. Do you have to list that methylparaben now in your finished product?
Yes, you do. You do, because in your raw material, it may not be 100% SLS. It might be 98% and maybe 2% of something else. Yeah. So you have to, by law, list anything that's intentionally added to the product.
Right. And so that's a little different than if there's like a residual ingredient. That sometimes there's the issue of ethoxylation, and some of the residual ingredient might be a 1,4-dioxane. You don't have to list 1,4-dioxane, even though, you know, it's in there, because you don't specifically add it. But if you specifically add something like a preservative, then yes, that has to be listed. Crystal is asking the replay. The replay is going to be available. I'm going to send an email afterwards, so you'll get to see the replay there. And this was an interesting thing you mentioned. Looks like we're at the top of the hour, so we're just going to answer a couple of more questions. Remember, click on that link and check out more about the course. There's lots of more information there, and we encourage everybody to check out the course. Okay. Nicole said, do you know when the 82 allergen substances is going to apply?
I do. I can't remember at the top of my head, but I know it's been voted on, and it's been published in the official journal. So I can give you that information quite easily. There will be a transition period. Yeah.
Well, I have to say that's going to make for some very long ingredient labels on the vacuum. So good luck. All right, we're just going to answer Liddy's asking where the link is. You should see an offers link right now. Let's see. I'm gonna click on the offer. Let me start the offer here. So you should be able to see that. Hopefully everybody sees the link to that. If you don't see the link, that's my bad. If you don't see the link, here I'm gonna put the link in the chat right there. There's the link to go check out the course. Richard said, is paraben carcinogenic? No, parabens are not carcinogenic, although that is the fear out there. There's no good evidence for that. Let's see. We'll finish it off here with let's see, one question to finish. Now, if you didn't get your question answered, I'm going to share them with Karen, and we will do follow-up questions via email. As long as we have your email, you can get that answered. But let's see, last question from Paulo. Is there a specific type of insurance that a small company should look into getting to protect against compliance mistakes? Oh, great question.
That's a
what
great
do you
think? That's quite a difficult one to answer. I'm sure there probably is. However, I think you can reduce your risk of issues by establishing good relationships with the authorities, doing your due diligence, show that you're trying to be on compliance, have your standard operating procedures. I think if you have all these things, it will be less of an issue. So you're looking to prevent, and yes, maybe there is an insurance, but I'm not aware specifically where you would have to go.
Generally, I think, at least in the US, issues like this would be covered under business insurance, and it's specifically because if somebody sues you because you've screwed up the labeling, or even if the FDA fines you because you've screwed up the labeling, generally a business insurance plan could probably help cover some of the costs of both the litigation and also the fines there. So, all right, Karen, this is very informative. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who participated. We went a little over. If you want more information about that course, feel free to click on the link there. The webinar will be available for replay for the next week, and we're taking new students in the course for the next week. But otherwise, I hope you found this helpful, and we're going to be doing a Q&A webinar in 2 weeks, so more questions to get answered. Karen, you have any last words here?
Oh, yes. This actually was my first professional webinar. So I would be grateful for any feedback that you may have.
Yes, and I'm going to give you Karen's contact information. We'll do a follow-up email that'll give you her contact information, and you can provide feedback there, and also talk to Karen directly Maybe if you need her to do a side project with you, I think she might be even open to that. So.
Yes.
And if you need lessons in Italian, I think she's learning that too.
Oh, yes, yes, to apply for Italian citizenship, yes.
All right, well, thanks everybody. And until our next time, I'm Perry Romanowski. This is chemistcorner.com, and we thank you all. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.